Welcome to the Flyers Nitty Gritty Podcast, getting gritty with it with your host, Yariv Wallach. And I have a special guest today, Steve Kornianos, the founder, lead writer, the head, the CEO of the Draft Analyst, somebody that I have followed for a few years so far. Steve, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Excited to get started today.
Yeah, thanks, Yariv. I appreciate it. And I don't know about CEO. That makes it sound like a lot exalted position that I actually have. I think I'm more like everybody else. I just watch a lot of hockey and write about it. And luckily, because of people like you and out there supporting me throughout the years, it's been able to grow. So really looking forward to talking some Flyers prospects and Flyers hockey over the next hour or so.
Awesome. And I'm really excited to have you. So let's actually get started with that. And you did mention, we were talking about this right before, you do have, I believe you just released the top 300, but you do have a final rankings list. So anybody who's listening to this, check that out as well. We'll link to that. We'll bring it up again later. But you do have kind of this final list that you're releasing for the preview, right, for the upcoming draft.
Yeah, it was done in June. And this was obviously when the COVID hit. So I knew that with the leagues all shut down, that I couldn't go back and I guess readjust it. I didn't want to. It was like a personal decision. But yeah, those rankings are available. If you go to my blog, thedraftanalyst.com, there's a little banner called Draft Headquarters, and you got everything there. You got rankings, mock drafts, scouting reports, all types of fun stuff. The links to podcasts, video highlights for prospects. It's all free. It's a free blog. So go check it out when you get a chance.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I've definitely used it myself over time. And you have nice little detailed reports on everybody, and you have a really good way of putting it. And we'll talk about some players a little bit, down the line. But I loved one in particular. I believe you called Joel Fairby the two-way assassin, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
I think that was it. Yeah. I love that. And my favorite player was always Simone Gagne at the NHL level. It was always one of my favorite things about him. He was this two-way goal scorer type of player. Always played the PK for us. So when I heard you say two-way assassin, I was like, that's my type of player. I was like, I love that. So let's open up. I want to give people a little background about yourself. You're from New York, right? Yep. I believe your favorite team are the New York Rangers. So anybody who thinks you might be biased toward Rangers, that's why. But how'd you get started? How'd you get started as writing? What's your background?
Well, when I was about 11 years old, I realized that I wasn't good enough to probably play, ice hockey. And so I just decided to kind of follow it more than I did play it. I mean, really, the limit was street hockey, in the streets of Brooklyn growing up in the 80s. And so really from a very young age, I mean, as far as I can remember, 12, 13 years old, I had drawers of spiral notebooks with stats, and I had subscriptions to all the magazines and read all the newspapers, the hockey news, the national, you name it. And so I was absolutely obsessed with hockey. And it was around that time, my early teen years, I decided I wanted to be a sports writer. So I went to Northeastern University in Boston. There were, I guess, I was lucky enough to get accepted there. And there I was able to, work for some pretty cool people in the hockey world. So, you're in Boston. It's a hockey hotbed. And did some internships, wrote for the school paper. And then when I graduated, I'm trying desperately to find a sports writing job. Couldn't really find one here and there. And then I got my break in, I think, 2000. So a good 3 years after I graduated, a place called Now Sports Data they were the official statisticians of Major League and minor league hockey. And then they got bought by ESPN. And, from that point forward, they were like, you guys got to go cover games. So really, I went from no type of beat experience whatsoever covering the pro game to covering Boston Bruins, Boston Celtics, covered the Beanpot, Hockey East tournaments. And so everything was going fine. I was doing that. We did a lot of prospect stuff there. We covered the AHL, top 30 prospects in the AHL, what have you. And then 9/11 happened, and I decided I had a higher calling. So I joined the U.S. Army. I did that for 13 years. And towards the end, when I realized I didn't want to do it anymore, I said, I guess I could try to go back to hockey. And I don't know. I love prospects. I love the draft. I felt that here in the United States, it's really only a handful of bloggers, I guess, per team that were really giving each pick, each prospect, the kind of attention that the fans want. Like with the NFL draft, I mean, I don't know if you watch the NFL draft, but like the guys on NFL Network and ESPN, they have these like binders and they're like this thick and they're like, oh, this guy's drafted, and they'll flip to it and ESPN will have all this footage on these guys, 6th-round picks and 7th-round picks. And with NHL, we never really got that. We got some detail on the first 30 guys, and then they'd have these like conversations when the picks are being announced and you like want to kick in your TV set. Like, all right, well, who are my guys? And once they figure out the guys got picked, you got to go online and try to find bits and pieces. So I said, you know what? I'm going to create my own website, and I'm going to educate myself on all these guys. I'm going to watch streams. I'm going to try to go to games as often as I can. And that's really how it started. It was more like a motivation from anger and disappointment in the way that the NHL draft was covered. And so now I think this is the peak. It has to be with because of COVID. Everybody's able to find time to. The actual beat writers are relying on people like us to provide them with prospect information. Because listen, they cover the beat. They don't have time. They got to cover 80, 81 plus or 82 plus games. So that's pretty much it. It's the motivation, and it seems like every year we're getting bigger and bigger, and the demand is higher and higher. So hopefully we get to meet that demand every year.
I love that, and I love actually that you recognize that the demand was there, because I mean, what you were speaking to about not having the info, I mean, I felt like that for sure growing up. I relied like deeply on like HF boards and just like any kind of message board. Like people were just obsessed, go very granular. Take the time to actually watch games. It is really hard to find. Hockey has never gotten that attention to detail that especially football gets. What anybody gets drafted, there is just an entire book on these guys, and like really in the NHL really don't have that available. So I think it's awesome, and I love that you've fulfilled that need. So how did it go from like NHL players though to prospects? Did you ever think like, oh, maybe I'll like make my way to like NHL level, or do you always kind of find out that like, no, prospects is really what I enjoy more, like the younger players, I mean, a lot of ways I think people do like that, right? The potential, the story behind a kid making the NHL. Is that kind of what sold you, or is it something different?
It's a little bit. I think when I was, when I was at Northeastern, I covered college hockey and so those are technically prospects. When I was at, Sports Tickers, How Sports Data, ESPN, whatever, covered, prospects, minor league hockey, the AHL. So it was always there. But the draft for me, hockey, was always very unique. I believe it was the 1989 draft with Matt Sundin. So I was about 14 years old. And the way that the whole thing was set up, with the podium and the whole entourage, that wasn't like, no other draft was really like that. It felt like NHL was a little unique in that regard. And so I always considered the draft and prospects to be a very critical part of being a hockey fan, that you can't really ignore it. Another thing was the Olympics before 1998. All the Olympics I watched had prospect teams outside of course, Russia and some of the European teams. But the Canadian team and the U.S. teams usually had the bigger prospects that they had for that draft year. So, but I guess what really tipped it over was the fact that there was a demand for the information for prospects. Whereas with the NHL, the beat writers really do a good job for the most part on giving us what we need to know. They have access to the players, access to the front office. But with prospects, not really. So I felt like it was more like a desire to fill a void than it was to say, well, I like this better than that. Because I still love the NHL. I mean, absolutely. For
sure. And I've heard you mention that before on your podcast, how like, you recognize that a lot of these kids get, they get a shout out, they get recognition. And I've noticed that too. I mean, we've interviewed a few prospects on this podcast, and these kids aren't famous. They're not like huge elite stars yet. They're working their butts off to hopefully become that one day. But I think they also appreciate it, and you get that two-way relationship as well. A little more humble.
Yeah, you got to be fair though. that's the tough thing. I know I've said it a lot this past year. Is that I don't like to be a know-it-all, but I try to. I've learned from my mistakes, and I've had people approach me and say, you're really harsh on some of these kids because I treat it like a fan. Like when you're sitting in your couch and you're watching a game and you see a bad play, you're going to yell at the guy at your TV. You're like, so I feel like when I used to watch prospects, I'm like, oh, idiot. But then I realized that, you know what, these are kids and they're going to make mistakes. So I've noticed that you'll notice that I don't do that anymore. I will not. Now, I'll be honest. I'll say the kid can't skate. The kid, makes bad decisions. He's a poor puck manager. That is constructive criticism that hopefully, if I'm right, will help that kid in his development, and his coaching staff is telling him the same thing. But with as far as like really beating them down, and you got to be patient, and with these kids, it's just like I said, it's just a little bit easier because then you also have to understand it from the that they are, like you said, they're trying to establish a name for themselves. They have a goal. A lot of them want to go to the NHL and win for the Stanley Cup, and I don't want to be the guy that hurts them. You know what I'm saying? But again, at the same time, it's I'm very survival of the fittest, believer in survival of the fittest. It's a dog-eat-dog world. You have to, the cream rises to the top. Use whatever metaphor you want. Because I would be doing fans a disservice if I was like, oh, everything's great and all these kids are great and they're all first-round picks and they're all going to score 50 goals. Like, It's not the reality. So,
well, it's the brilliance of sports too. There's no lying in sports. Like, you can tell your fans all day, hey, this is the best guy in the league. If the fans show up and he's not performing, they're going to turn on him in a heartbeat. It's not one of those things where you can really lie your way to your success, right? It's not the corporate world necessarily where you can kind of get by being quiet in meetings. Like, if you're not doing it on the ice, everybody's going to notice. And I feel like that's always why I'm a little softer as well. And I know the type of people that it takes to even make, especially like high level of hockey. You're not like lazy for them is not lazy for me. Like, you know what I mean? Like a lazy professional athlete is like the average person. You know what I mean? Yeah. They're not actually lazy. So I think about stuff like that all the time in perspective.
They're skating like 35 miles a week, the equivalent of like 35 miles a week. So even if they're not moving all that fast, it's like, a marathon runner who finishes in 7 hours still ran a freaking marathon. So I get it.
Yeah, totally. All right, so let's get into the fun part. Got a little background on you. Well, actually, real quick, who was your favorite hockey player growing up? I want to get a good idea of like what kind of players do you like? What are the players that get you excited?
I love the defensemen. I love Brian Leetch. He was definitely my hero. I watched him play as early as the '88 Olympic team. Saw him play, I think, in Boston College in like 1 year, but. That was to me because his dynamism with the puck. But of course, I'm growing up in the mid '80s, and it was just Wayne Gretzky and Mark Messier. I was not a Ranger only fan. I was a hockey fan. So on the back of my bedroom door, I had posters of. Let's see which Flyers I had. I had Dave Poulin. I love Dave Poulin. And actually, when I went to the All American Top Prospects game, it was at the Wells Fargo Center, right? And this was back in 2017. Yeah. And they have like this display of like the Flyers like Hall of Fame. And Dave Poulin's had like a little 8.5 by 11 cutout on the floor leaning up against the wall in the display. Everyone else had their own little shelf. And I think I tweeted out, I said, hey, come on. You're doing Dave Poulin dirty. He's one of the best two-way forwards in the game. But yeah, like I loved the skill guys. Paul Coffey when he was on Edmonton, Phil Housley. And of course, later on as I got older, the game changed. You went to the kind of like the dead puck era. But even then, I still like guys like Scott Niedermayer. I really liked Eric Desjardins until he went to the Flyers and played for the Legion of Doom Flyers because they seemed to give the Rangers a hard time. I love the speed and the skill. But at the same time, it's all about the creativity in the hockey sense. You could be fast and you could have soft hands. But the players that stand out to me is the ones that can almost treat it like a basketball player, like a point guard. I'm a big basketball guy, so I love the guys that did the crossover dribbles and the no-look passes, the Isaiah Thomases and the Magic Johnsons and, Tim Hardaways and what have you. If the flashier the defenseman, the more I'll like him, even if he's terrible in his own end.
I love that. It's a great answer, actually. And Brian Leetch is a legend. And I mentioned Simone Gagne earlier. I was obviously a kid at the time. But I remember this one moment forever where Simone Gagne stripped Brian Leach in particular stripped him of the puck and put the puck in the net. It was like a big goal. And I remember like being a kid and being like, oh, that's a huge deal. Because like Brian Leach was like the man growing up. And I definitely remember that.
Score 100 points.
Wow, that's incredible. And I've actually heard that Cam York can be compared to Brian Leach, but we'll see if you agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I want to go into the NHL draft overall. I want to talk about like the first round essentially, maybe just get your ideas of, what you see as like the top picks. I've seen some large varieties, surprisingly, starting at 5, even with like somebody like Raymond, like dropping down to even like 8 or 10. And then I've seen some other guys like Jarvis dropping really low to like 18, and I've seen him taking a 10. So I've seen a bunch of names flying up and down. I want to hear your opinion on what you think about this draft, and not just that, also the situation we're under. And I think it's very real that a lot of footage that you would have normally been able to watch, games that you would have been able to see, time that not just you, but other people around the league. I just focus on you right now, right? Because you're heavy into prospects and the draft. There's some gaps there. So I want to see what are your thoughts on the first round this year on that, at least that top 10 and, top 30.
All right. Well, just let me preface that. All very good questions. Let me preface that by saying that this year in particular, I invested more time than ever, without a doubt, on the 2020 draft class. And my draft season for 2020 started on June, 23rd, 2019, or whatever, after day 2, after my report cards for the 2019 draft were over, I went right into 2020. And on the surface, I assessed it like most people did, that it was going to be a little top heavy on the wing side, not a whole lot of defensemen. You got the one franchise goalie in Askarov, but that was about it. And it wasn't going to be as deep at center ice. So because of that, all those things considered, lack of defensemen, lack of elite centermen, outside of 1 or 2 names, that it was going to be below 2019, that the 2019 class with all those outstanding centers and the mobile defensemen, the two-way defensemen that we saw, and then, of course, 2018, which had a very good NTDP, also had a very strong defense. That was the defense draft. Remember, we had Quinn Hughes and Boquist and Dobson and Bouchard and Rasmus Dahlin, of course, first overall. And so then I looked at 2016. I said, I don't know, that NTDP with Matthews and Dubois, with Tkachuk and then Dubois. And then, of course, 2015 was considered the deepest draft since 2003, and now it looks like it's pacing to be better than it. Mm-hmm. So I would say, on the surface, let's go back to July 1st, 2019. I felt that the 2020 draft was one of the weaker ones because of the fact that it did not have as many elite centers. But what helped it was the availability, I guess, or the presence of a legit franchise number 1 in Alexis Lafreniere. So as the season progressed, we, kind of saw these guys that we had an eye on. Some guys struggled out of the gate, and it started really messing with the rankings, because when you have a top 5, top 3 caliber guy like Lucas Raymond get off to a very slow start and not really producing at all, then the excuse train starts, and you have to kind of start justifying why you're going to keep him there. And it seemed like every time we were justifying it, it went back to what he did the season prior and not what he was doing the current season. And then, of course, you had 3 German kids. They had a really good – you got 3 German kids in European elite leagues, or really the same league. And so they were able to jump up rankings. And then out of nowhere, you had these WHL kids like Seth Jarvis and Connor Zary leading the league, or among the league leaders in scoring. And that's a big thing for me. I can't speak for other people, but if you're leading your team in scoring, or you're top 5 or top 10 in your junior league in scoring in your draft season, that's a big deal to me. That means that you are outperforming guys who are 18, 19, 20 years old. So I know some people felt like, oh, there's going to be a historic draft. And I mean, that was definitely hyperbolic. I don't consider this to be historic, but that top 11, that top 12, even though it's mostly wing driven, is still pretty good. And then you throw in those 2 elite defensemen, and you throw in the elite goalie in Askarov. So as a whole, I would say that I'd give it maybe a B grade, the draft as a whole. The first 12 or 11, 12 picks, I'd give them an A. It's an outstanding group. similar to 2017, really, where we knew it was a weak draft, but we saw at least 8 to 10 of those kids had superstar potential, and we're kind of seeing that now. So, but I really like this crop. They were fun to follow, both Europe and in North America. And when the shutdown happened, I had to make the decision to say, all right, my assessments pretty much have already been done. It sucks that we don't have the playoffs. It sucks that we don't have the U18 World Championships and potentially the men's World Championship, where you probably would have seen guys like Stutzla, and maybe you would have seen a guy like Lafreniere play for Canada if they wanted to do that. But it is what it is, and I still think that you will find a first-round caliber guy in the late first, early second, or early second, mid-second, because some of these plays in the first round might have a red flag or two, and they usually drop. And so whichever way the rankings look right now, it's not how the draft is going to end up. There's going to be a few surprises. They do it every year, so you just got to buckle up and let it unfold.
Yeah, I was actually thinking this year could be one of the largest gaps between the NHL's internal, like the NHL team's internal scouting and the media scouting. Not necessarily that, they think he's a good player and they don't think he's a good player. It's more of like the team had him at 10 and then, maybe the media had him at 20. I expect like maybe those gaps, like for instance, we drafted Travis Kneckney. I think he was ranked 11th that year quite commonly, and then dropped all the way down, and then the Flyers, got aggressive, grabbed him because, quite frankly, even in a retrospective, it's really not a lower first-round pick type of player. He just had questions to his game, like you're saying.
I was wondering, do you guys, has that ever been made public why he dropped? Was it the injury concern, or was it because he won the award for like the hardest working prospect at the draft? And he had this great, I think he used to play for, was it Ottawa? Did he play for the Ottawa 67s?
Yep.
I forgot who he played for. But in any event, he was fantastic. And he, his compete level, everything that he did was fine. Then I'm like, why is he slipping? So did it ever come out why he slipped? Or no?
We never heard anything like official. The only thing I ever heard was he had skating problems. Saw him skate. I'm like, I don't see that. We consider him, at least here in Philly, we consider him kind of like a Brad Marchand without the same problems, like at least like personality problems. But we see him as an elite guy. At the pace that he's moving on, the type of year he had this year, 60 points this year, just under a point per game pace. The way he was playing this year, at the age, at the rate that he's moving, he's on a Claude Giroux-like pace as far as scoring is for us. Do I know if he's going to be a 100-point player? I don't know. But he does seem like an 80 to 90-point guy, at least for the Flyers. His role has been immense for our team. So that's why I wonder. And I see another guy in the draft, Marco Rossi, right? So he's ranked really high, number 5. I've seen him. I think he won the scoring title as well, if I remember correctly, right? Highly talented player. But then I see 5'9", 183 pounds, actually very good. So is Travis Kneckney. He's a thick 5'9" kid. Do you expect a guy like Marco Rossi to somehow drop to, maybe not 20s, but maybe 15 even, just because of a size issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll tell you that I've been following this game long enough, and I know a lot of your listeners probably the same thing. We've all been following this game long enough to know that as much as we as fans love to but to really drool over stats and fancy numbers and goals and assists, that when NHL teams are doing their scouting, it's a year-long process. Sometimes it's for a given draft, it's going to be a 2-year process or even greater than that. They want guys. I think if you talk to enough NHL types and scouting, front office execs, if you talk to enough of them, they will tell you that they want kids to have a willingness to improve. They want kids that show up to the rink every day and want to improve and are going to be receptive. Obviously, having a lot of skill helps, speed helps, and hands help. Hockey sense helps, but they like it. And I used the analogy the other day in my last podcast, comparing the Elias Anderson versus Brett Howden issue that Rangers fans have, where one guy was a malcontent and complained all the time, but he was the high pick. And the other kid was not a malcontent. He just showed up and did what was asked of him. And people are questioning, well, why is he playing? And I'm like, there's your answer right there. If you had a job and you're up for promotion and you complain all the time, and the guy next to you is also the same kind of resume, but also up for the same promotion, and he doesn't complain all the time, chances are the guy who doesn't complain all the time is going to get the promotion. So it's a similar thing when it comes to these teams, the way they evaluate kids. Now, Marco Rossi has no red flags from a personality standpoint. He's absolutely coachable. He's a two-way player. But to answer your question, the playoffs can be a huge or offer a huge referendum on the way that the draft is executed. And unfortunately, specifically for the analytics types, who I respect, but they kind of took a couple of body blows the last couple of Stanley Cups, is that we're seeing the gritty and the veterans and the big body types and the shot blockers really help those teams propel into deep playoff runs. And so if teams see that, they're like, well, why am I going to draft a 5'9" kid when, look at the way Mitch Marner got pushed around and look at the way that some of these smaller guys are not succeeding in the playoffs. But again, I don't know. It depends on where that organization is. So for a team picking in the top 5, chances are you're not going to be in the Stanley Cup final anytime soon. Right. So, hey, why not give it a shot? So I don't see it being a problem with Rossi because he's such a brilliant player. However, I could see a team being like, you know what? What if we discover that someone a little bit bigger, but further down the draft might have just as high a ceiling, maybe like a Teddy Niederbach from Sweden, and I'm just throwing out a random name. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see, but that's what makes it fun. You really can't predict it.
I love that. That's why I get it. I mean, personally, as a Flyers fan, right, we're 23rd pick. That's why I ask these questions, right? Because I'm thinking, who's going to overthink those picks that, like, in my opinion, I think the Flyers got very lucky to even take Joel Fairby a few years ago. I didn't think he was going to be available at 14. Matthew Barzal, there's a very popular one. When I was watching that draft, I was praying that the Devils didn't take Provorov, but I was like, if they take Provorov, I want Barzal. That was like in my mind, right? So I had like in my mind either number 1 defenseman, number 1 forward, type of thing in my mind. Everybody passed on that kid. I still don't understand why. I mean, I kind of, but not really. But you see that stuff happen. That's why I get excited as well. It's like, I like that stuff. Yeah. I like when good players fall.
Gives us plenty to talk and complain about too. And, the whole process really is a lot. The more I do this, the more I realize how tough of a process it is. And I start becoming less and less of a fan. Like, what a bust. You drafted him 5th overall in 2016. Well, look at his resume. The kid deserved to be 5th overall. So, no.
Yeah. It's interesting that way. So is there anybody that you see potentially maybe – it's a little hard, and this is the one thing I brought up earlier, is that 2017 draft, you had the Nolan Patrick, Nico Hischier, right, battle. That changed at the very end, right? And those games at the very end mattered. We don't necessarily have that here, but do you think that there is anybody on these lists that might be moving up or down? And it doesn't necessarily have to be a first-round pick guy. Maybe it's a second-round pick guy. Like Morgan Frost was taken by the Flyers a little early. These are guys who gain interest like towards the end. Maybe they're playing a number 2 role behind somebody who's better than they are. But then all of a sudden next year they get their role elevated and they start producing at a high clip. Like, is there anybody on this board that you think kind of falls?
Well, there's going to be, unfortunately, we have the European leagues all playing right now, and none of the North American leagues outside of the Quebec League playing, exhibition hockey. So I read an article a few days ago, and I read another one today on NHL.com. Mike Moriali, if you don't follow him on Twitter, give him a follow. He does a great job for NHL.com. That he basically interviewed a whole bunch of scouting directors, not scouts, scouting directors. And the scouting directors were saying that, yes, like absolutely we use video. And, even though that one continent isn't really playing right now and the other one is, that it's going to play into what we've done. Some teams have said, nope, all this is done and we're not changing it. I know the Kings recently went public and they said that, no, our decision has been made with whom we're taking at 2nd overall. Obviously, they didn't say who, but they basically said everything's been done. There's nothing that'll change our minds. So it's difficult, though. This is very difficult because what if, like, you had question marks about a kid and he shows up in the next season, which isn't the standard, the standard, I guess, event that happens. Because usually the draft is done after a season. There's not another season like, let's just keep watching him more. But if you had doubts about a kid and you see him, I guess, address or correct those issues in this new season, albeit in a short sample size, that could have, and I think a couple of teams, specifically New Jersey, said that that will affect how they draft, like based on, what's going on in Europe right now. So really, you have to, if that's the case, I'm not saying that all teams are going to think this way, but if that is the case, then you have to look at a guy like Askarov, the goalie, now climbing. You have to look at a guy like Lucas Raymond, maybe offsetting his marginal draft season with this excellent preseason and start to his SHL season. And that will maybe knock a guy down like a Cole Perfetti because, maybe people don't like his skating. And now that he's not playing and, Lucas Raymond is, it could be Alexander Holtz. I haven't seen him play yet. I think his opener was the other day, but what if he had a bad game? And the team's like, I don't know. I don't want to. So I really can't answer that definitively, but the fact that we have NHL scouting directors on record saying that, we're using video and it's going to help certain kids. I think it'll be more pronounced, though, in the later rounds. I think for the most part, teams have made up their minds on their first rounders. If I would pick one person who's going to fall in that top 10 that we've pretty much hasn't really moved around that much this season, I would say Rossi, and only because of the whole playoff situation that we saw with physicality and maybe some concerns that there could be someone, a center, who could provide the same kind of production, at least project to provide that kind of production without the worry about him getting pushed around or losing a lot of puck battles. So,
yeah. And that makes sense. That totally makes sense to me quite a bit. And maybe he won't drop, but after seeing Cole Caulfield, and I thought for sure Cole Caulfield might be an exception to this rule because I'm like, who puts up 70 goals and then gets dropped? But he's 5'7", right? There's nothing wrong with his game. Like, I couldn't find a thing wrong with his game. Everything is elite outside of his size. And he's still, for instance, the Flyers passed on him, and Flyers fans were definitely upset. I don't think any of them really understood that. I think Cam York, and I do want to talk about him, is a pretty good prospect to have on that back end. So I don't think we necessarily lost out there. But, I find it interesting that even in today's age, that strength still wins. But personally, and I'm not a big dude, I'm 5'7". I work out very regularly. I know the limitations of my body, right? And that has to be considered with a lot of these guys, like even Keandre Miller, right? I believe that he was taken a few years ago, right after Jay O'Brien, and I think the Flyers were supposed to take him at the time, at least theoretically. But he's a player who's a lot of physical gifts, from what I understand, right? Now his game caught up to that, and from what I understand, he's doing exceptional. And it's like there is something to be said there, right? Moritz Seider in Detroit, right? He moves up in that ranking. It's this physicality edge that I think a lot of GMs, they look at it and they go, well, you can't change that, regardless of how talented you are. And I think it hurts some players. Is there anybody that you think that's at the bottom that might see a boost because of either physicality or some other reason?
Well, let's say, like I said, again, using the recent postseason as a backdrop, where you have these 5 rounds and the wars in some of these series, the physicality was out of control, and it really was kind of like survival of the fittest out there. Not to get waxed too poetic about this past postseason because there were no fans and it's kind of weird. But at the same time, there are a couple of guys that I watched play later in the season and said, you know what? I'm not really trying to predict the first round. I'm trying to predict that this young man's going to be given an opportunity to be drafted in the first round. And because he's going to be given this opportunity, he's just going to work even harder. And the one guy that really stands out to me is Daniel Torgerson from Sweden. He's like 6'2", 195, but he could skate. He's got he's just the competitiveness and the battle level, and that he's used in all these key situations. And he had like a 31.3 shooting percentage in the Swedish Junior Hockey League, the Super Elite. So there were a lot of boxes checked with him, and I earmarked him. I got him late in the first round, and I got a lot of 5'11", 5'10" types ahead of him, but he's a guy that I could see being higher on a lot of lists. Listen, there are going to be teams out there that are going to have a defenseman like Braden Schneider, a physical, mobile, Western Canadian kid. He's going to be ranked ahead of a playmaking center or a sniping winger that we might have in 15 or 12. Because that team is like, hey, my definition of best player available is physicality. And so that's why it seems like fans get confused. They think that best player available means the most stats or the highest scoring or like offensive upside. but that's not the case. Every team has a different definition of best player available. And if, let's say, the Devils view Braden Schneider as a potential number one franchise carrying Jake Sanderson type, they might. I mean, look, we had Barrett Hayton go 5th overall a couple of years ago. Barrett Hayton got drafted ahead of a couple of names. Now, we saw him as a riser and a potential the potential to crack the top 10. But, I mean, look who they passed on to draft him. So I think that Torgerson is one of several kids that you'll see, not necessarily in the first round, but a guy like, let's say, like Dylan Peterson from the NTDP, big California kid, physical, plays a similar game, could play center or wing. These kids that could skate and hit. I have a feeling that since the majority of the NHL scouting community is made up of guys who played in the 70s and 80s and 90s, they're going to lean more towards those guys. I mean, look at Kevin Cheveldayoff, big physical defenseman. Mark Bergevin, big physical defenseman. These, you could go up and down the list.
Great point.
That would answer the question for a lot of fans. Like, why do we take this guy? I think a lot of it has to do with internal definitions or categories for defining what a best player available is. And it all varies from team to team.
No, totally. I think that's actually an excellent point. And I think what happens is that a lot of us get trained by video games. Like I'm a big gamer, but I also understand that like video games are not, and again, I'm not judging anybody who's comparing anything, but we look at the best player available and they give you, a little number to indicate how talented they are. They give you a potential, they give you, everything's very obvious of what you need to look at that makes them the best player available, right? The stats, what they tell you the potential is. But in real life, it's really not like that, right? It's, it's why you take risks on big players. And Flyers actually have a draft pick, a goaltender from a few years ago, Fedotov, Ivan Fedotov. I don't know if you followed him at all. He was a 7th-round pick from a few years back. I remember everybody wrote him off. He was 6'7" goaltender. Now he's playing in the KHL and has very good numbers. And it's like, that's kind of why, you kind of take risks on players because they have maybe a physical edge that, you said like you can't teach. And if they combine other elements with it, I mean, I've seen so many defensemen drafted in the 2nd round that ended up being top pairing defensemen, 3rd round top pairing defensemen, guys who maybe they had it all together, but were missing something or speed. And the most popular one on our team right now is Phil Myers, right? That guy's 6'5", was passed up in a camp, and we still don't know how we got him. We have no idea. We're like ecstatic that he's a Flyer. So it's very interesting, and he's a guy who wasn't even on this list. So, all right. So I got a bunch of players I want to ask you about, and I want to go down the Flyers list. We talked about this a little bit earlier. We have a kind of a deep pool here in Philly. Everybody's so proud of them, but we always have Philadelphia opinions on them. So I think this would be nice to get somebody who's not a Flyers fan talking about our prospects. So I want to start. I want to start with the first one I want to talk about is Nolan Patrick. And I want to start off with him first because he's kind of like not a prospect anymore, but he's kind of sitting in this weird space. And I think it's a good place to start, kind of set the tone for this. So Nolan Patrick, taken 2017, number 2 overall, injured, hasn't played. The early talk here is that, they're hoping he's ready for beginning of the season. Personally, we have not heard anything, Steve. We have not heard a word. And I don't think that they're going to be telling us anything soon, but he's still up for a contract as well. What do you think about Nolan Patrick? What do you think about his current situation, health-wise, and just NHL potential still, and where you see him? Did he deserve second overall?
First of all, he was the right pick at 2nd overall. I know that people want to look back and look at the names that the Flyers passed over, but when you're trying to evaluate a draft prospect, you have to go back as far as you can to an extent when they're playing against significantly older competition. And Patrick, being the heralded WHL pick that he was way back in 2013, and then he played for Team Canada at the 2015 Halenka. It wasn't even his draft year. And then he plays for Brandon, and he has this 100-point season, and they're in the Memorial Cup, and he's basically like a key contributor. And he's again not in his draft year. So all signs pointed to this kid being the consensus number 1 pick. And he really was. There were very few. I don't really think anybody. I had Nico Hischier 1st overall. I don't think anybody had Cale McCall first overall. I don't think anybody had Miro Heiskanen first overall. It was pretty much the Nolan Patrick draft. And then when the injuries started happening again, that's when people like myself were like, all right, well, yeah, let me give Casey Middlestat a bump, and let me give Hischier a bump, and let me give McCarr a bump, because obviously with this Nolan Patrick thing, with injuries, and I'm an injury guy. When it comes to the draft and ranking, I will knock a kid down because of injury. I do it every year because I think it's a legitimate concern, and until the kid can prove that he's healthy and he's able to not only return to play, but return back to the high level that he was playing at before he got hurt, because we all know getting injured could be incredibly debilitating. It could knock you and could make you bedridden for like a month, depending on the nature of the injury, where you lose all that muscle, you lose your hands, you lose your timing. And so that matters to me. So I knocked Patrick down, and a lot of us did. And then he had more injuries leading up to the draft. He goes to the combine. I guess they gave him a clean bill of health. And ever since he joined the Flyers, I've watched him plenty the last few years, definitely he's had moments where he's looked like a potential star player in the league. Those moments, unfortunately, are few and far between. I know he's been bounced around the lineup. What hasn't helped him is the fact that the Flyers have had established veteran forwards for quite some time. So whether they want to play him on the wing or play him at center ice, that means you got to, hope that Ironman types like Couturier and Giroux and Voracek, who always seem to be in the lineup, right? Am I wrong? Aren't those guys seem to be at least 70, 75 games a season? And Absolutely. So when will he get that opportunity to play alongside guys like that? And then you factor in the Travis Kneckney draft pick. And overall, I think that the injuries are definitely unfortunate. The Flyers definitely have to make a decision on him. I don't think he'll ever become the star player, the franchise-carrying center that we thought he'd become. Joel Farabee's already jumped him on the prospect chart, if you want to, call it that. And there might be another prospect or two as well when all is said and done. So I'm not going to call him a bust. I think what's best for him, though, is to definitely wait until he's healthy. If he's got to sit out an entire season, and maybe, though, I know it's tough to sell it to the fans. I know it's tough to sell it if you're a scouting director or a GM. Now I don't think. Well, Patrick was a Hextall pick, wasn't it?
He was, yep.
All right, so the current group does not have an emotional attachment to the pick where they could say, hey, we gave this kid a shot. But I still think he deserves another look. You don't want to give up on him right away. So if you could sign him to like a small little deal, maybe 1 year, load it up with incentives, maybe 2 years. Unfortunately, he's probably not going to get a whole lot because of the situation with COVID and the lack of HRR and the flat cap and or what have you. But to I guess wrap it all up, I think that let's give him another full season. Let's give him another chance to show what he can do. And I if I would use one example, I know Flyers fans don't want to hear this, but Jake Virtanen was just absolutely beat up by Vancouver fans for years, calling him a bust. Why do we draft him ahead of this guy? Why do we draft him ahead of this guy? We could have had Pasternak. We could have had Dylan Larkin. And poor Jake Virtanen, a little bit to his own doing, was his own doing. But after 6 years, he finally showed up and he scored a couple of big goals. He was critical in their playoff run. So even though your second overall pick isn't becoming a future star and an all-star like an Elias Pettersson, if Nolan Patrick can reinvent himself and be a physical bottom six kind of a guy, play 15 minutes a game, occasionally fill in on the top six, then you still got an NHL player out of it. And I think sometimes we see situations like that where it works out. So you can't close the book on him just yet, but time's kind of running out.
Yeah, and I think that's where the size advantage comes in again, right? Because Patrick is already a big kid coming in the NHL, and I think teams, when they look to draft big kids, they go, the very least, he's a bottom six forward, right? We got ourselves a third line center at the very least, and that's where Flyers fans kind of see him right now. Is we're hoping that he can play third line center for us behind Kevin Hayes next year. I personally believe what I've seen from him, there are still flashes of being an elite center. But the health obviously will be a big part of that. So if he can come back healthy, the team is playing the best they played in a decade. The structure around him will be solid. But to your point, too, he's not part of this administration's original drafting, right? It's the same scouts. Like the scout team is still very similar, right? So I don't think they're going to give up on him overnight or anything like that. We have other cases like that, like Sam Moran and stuff. But I do think that, the GM can kind of say, hey, I didn't make that second overall pick. So if I trade it, it doesn't look like I'm the one who took the risk and then I'm the one who moved him.
Yeah.
Having said that, the Flyers are in a position where they can give him time. So I think no matter what, they'll get time. So we're still waiting on him. But let's go through the other ones. We have some other ones we want to go through. We'll go through defensemen and forwards, but I'll just mix them in through. So kind of just do like a firing round through these. So Wyatt Wiley just signed an entry level actually with the Flyers. So he's going to be playing for the Phantoms, hopefully. Flyers fans are pretty excited about him. He's actually a friend of our show as well. Jamie, my co-star, has a relationship with Wyatt. So we're excited to see him play. What do you think about Wyatt Wiley?
I love this kid, man. And I liked him a lot. I forgot where I ranked him back in 2018. But, when you watch a kid play, and he plays for Everett, right? And Everett has always been a defense-oriented system. Carter Hart played there. Now they got Dustin Wolf in goal. And so Everett has never really been the kind of program where in the WHL where they're going to just put up a ton of goals. But this year, it seemed like they had a really good crew. And it was more up-tempo than in years past. At least that's my interpretation. But what I loved about Wiley, especially in his draft year, was that he was the guy that everybody on the ice relied on to bail them out. You know what I mean? Like, he was the guy, like, he's a defenseman, so he's got the breakout ability. He's got pretty good skating. He's upright. He's got the good size, excellent passer, crisp first passer. But, when you're under pressure, there's a lot of factors that are involved in that you need to address, I guess, to beat that pressure. And a lot of it is poise. A lot of it is confidence in yourself and timing. And so when Wiley's got the puck and he's under pressure, it seems like he developed a reputation this particular year, because I had to watch Everett. They had Gage Gonsalves. They had Michael Gut. They had a couple of draft prospects. So you watch those kids, you watch Wiley. He was playing over 20-something minutes a night for them. And also, so you watch him play, like, even the notable guys on Everett are like, all right, dude, just bail us out, man. Like, and that is a huge sign for me. It's a telling sign that not only does the coaching staff trust this kid by playing him 20 minutes a night and being a top pairing guy or top four guy, before that, but now his teammates trust him as well. And you look at his progression statistically, it's exactly what you want. I mean, this kid was a 5th-round pick. He was a 5th-round pick. And if you watched him play this year, listen, Devils fans, don't get mad. I love Ty Smith. I had him ranked ahead of Quinn Hughes, and I think Ty Smith will be one of the top young defensemen in hockey eventually. The jury's still out. But you can make the argument that Wyatt Wiley was just as good as Ty Smith this year. And Smith, same draft class, same year group, or pretty much same draft class at least, same league, same level of competition. And, Wiley's the one who actually, I think he might have even outproduced him. So I definitely like him a lot. I was kind of, when I was doing my top 5 Flyers prospects, I'm like, why Kalnick versus Wiley? And I gave the edge to Kalnick, who's obviously not on the team anymore, but because I thought he might be closer to the NHL because of his experience in college, whereas you definitely want to see what Wiley does in the AHL. So we all love fancy junior stats, but when you got a 6'1", 190-pound, 6'2", whatever he is, defenseman who could skate, incredible hockey IQ for his position, you got to give him the benefit of the doubt that he'll find a way to make it work out, whether it's in the AHL or the NHL.
That's a pretty swimming review. I actually love that. And I mean, we watch from afar. I mean, some of us get to watch some of the games. I have some experience watching him. I've seen him mostly in dev camp, preseason, stuff like that. He definitely impressed us, but hearing what you're saying about the reliability, the calm that he brings on the ice, those are the guys who make the NHL. I mean, quite frankly, it's the guys who have the poise to handle the aggressive nature of the game. So that's awesome. I love that review. And Flyers fans should be excited then. That's cool. That's great. All right, let's move on to the next one. We got Adam Yinning, former second-round pick of the Flyers.
All right. Well, people aren't familiar with him. I mean, Flyers fans are, but he was a a mainstay on Sweden's blue line for a lot of the international events, the big ones. He played at the World Junior Championship. So if you're a Swedish defenseman, and no matter what round you picked in, whether it be the second round or the third round, if your National Hockey Federation is identifying you as one of the top 6 defensemen for your age group, then that's always a good thing, because it happens every year. It's not like he was there at the U16 level and they said, maybe we could use someone else. He was there at the 16-year-old level, the 17-year-old level, and up and up and up and up. And so now he's basically established as an SHL defenseman. I know he split last season. I guess you could call it a little bit of a demotion, because he went to the Allsvenskan, which is like the Swedish AHL. But he's back. I think he got moved, actually. I think he's on Färjestad now.
Yep.
And I haven't seen him play. But the one thing with Yinning that you'll get size and you'll get physicality. So where I will definitely not put him in the wily category in terms of puck poise and patience. It's maybe a little bit the opposite with him. Puck management for a defenseman is huge. And that has always been an issue with Yinning. I think that you're never going to get a lot of offense out of him. He has a pretty hard shot. That's about it. So he would be a guy, if he ever makes it, he'll be the kind of defenseman who you plug in that bottom pairing, plays, 14 to 17 minutes a night. If you have a triple overtime game, he'll come in handy because he'll be rested. But I considering where they drafted him, I understand why they took him where they took him, 50th overall. It's just that, the physicality. I mean, he's a real mean guy. He's a mean kid. You play against him, he'll mush you, he'll snuff you, he'll hit you into the boards, hit from behind. Very abrasive young man. And the skating is, I guess, average, maybe slightly above average, because he's got that long stride. But I don't see him being the kind of guy who'll ever challenge for a top 4 spot. I mean, it would take a lot. And the fact that he's been a full-time SHLer now for this will be his 4th season. Now you're wondering, what do we do with him? He's already played 4 years in a row against men, and you're really not seeing the kind of progression you want, at least production-wise. So automatically assume that once he hits the AHL, he's not going to put up a lot of points no matter who you pair him with. Could he be a safety net for a guy like a Cam York? Again, it goes back to the puck management, and he'll have to clean it up. I haven't seen him play enough the last, I guess, season, outside of a few international games and a couple of SHL games. But I know for a fact that he's still very much a project, and you can't pencil him in for anything. But then again, he might impress some people at a camp one day with his physicality, and maybe get the right tutelage once he comes to North America and kind of refine his game.
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen from him, very physical. He looks wide. He's got a very wide build to him. But I was a little surprised that he was taken at, in the second round, number 50, especially when you consider Wyatt Wiley was taking after him, and the skill set that he brings. But again, it's what we were talking about earlier. They see a big frame, they see a big, strong kid. He keeps making the Swedish program. They're looking at on paper. He's kind of, he seems like a legit chance at maybe getting a serious bottom pairing defenseman in the NHL who can, potentially play 18 minutes a night or whatever, 17 minutes a night and block shots. I see that stuff all the time. So people are pretty sour on Yinning, but time will tell. We have Alexander Appleyard, who writes for The Athletic. He also covers the Flyers locally. He is very established with all the Swedish prospects. He's not very high on Yinning, so it seems pretty consistent with what you're saying. But it happens, and we'll see what happens in the future. All right, let's move on to the next one. This is one that I'm still high on this kid. Jay O'Brien was taken in the first round, same draft, number 19 overall. I mentioned earlier, I think the Flyers passed up on Keandre Miller, actually, who I know at the time was being considered. Jay O'Brien had a very, very good start in his prep school career, but since then some injury problems. Where do you see Jay O'Brien? He's had some recent success. Where do you see his long-term potential and where he is today?
All right, I'm going to drop an old school Philly reference,
Love
and it has to do with the draft. All right, you guys remember Mike Mamula?
Yeah.
All right, Mike Mamula was a linebacker who played for Boston College, and I was in Boston at the time going to college, and so I watched plenty of BC games, and I never felt that Mike Mamula was a first-round NFL draft pick, and he went to the combine and freaking smashed it out of the park. I mean, he set records. It was all over. Every newspaper covered it. Sporting News, USA Today, Pro Football Weekly, everybody, whoever it was talking about Mike Mamula. And he was the kind of guy that used that combine specifically to springboard himself. I believe he was a top 10 pick. And by the time he got to the NFL and he played for it wasn't working out. He was either not physical enough or just the speed of the game. He couldn't keep up. But in any event, Jay O'Brien was viewed as a specimen. He was viewed as a specimen because of his speed. He wasn't big, but if you watched him play in the prep, and this is what's very tricky about covering prep hockey, is that you're playing against high school freshmen. You're playing against, high school sophomores. These could be 14, 15-year-old kids. And I cover Minnesota hockey this year. I went to the tournament, and there were a couple of kids on big-time programs who were 14 and 15 years old. And so here they are playing in state championship with seniors and juniors. So if you could dominate that age group, if you're so fast, you're going to make mincemeat out of those defensemen who don't know anything about timing, who are still working. And how many kids from prep hockey really become legitimate NHL prospects? Very few. Usually those kids are earmarked for a program like the NTDP, and they'll be plucked out of the high school program, or they'll go to a program like at Shattuck St. Mary, which is kind of like an all-star collection of kids from across the United States and Canada when it comes to prepsters. So with O'Brien, he had, he was basically toyed with those kids, and then he was fantastic at the All-American Prospects game, which is a big high-profile event. And so a couple of people I talked to were like, this kid is a stud. He's a first-round talent. And I was like, what am I missing? What am I missing? So when he went to Providence, it was very clear. Patrick Moynihan is a kid that I loved, and the Devils ended up drafting him late. And because I like Moynihan so much, and plus I had to watch Paul Caford play for Providence, so I was going to watch Jay O'Brien and see, well, not really Moynihan, but I was going to watch Jay O'Brien and see how he would do playing on a big-time program. And, it was an adjustment period. He was a bottom six player. He was used on the penalty kill because of his speed. So the decision to leave Providence and go to the BCHL wasn't a bad idea. But, again, you're talking about a 19th overall pick. And, is he going to live up to those expectations? History says no, unfortunately. But, again, he's probably going to be a long-term project. For him to not only just adapt. Did he decommit? Is he get committed to someplace else, or is he? I don't know what his.
I think he. Man, I'm actually forgetting it off the top of my head right now. I apologize. I had it earlier.
I'm sorry to ask.
No, I forget. I know it's cool. I forget too.
If he's allowed to go back to Providence,
I think he's going to. I think he's going to Boston. He's going to a different college. I'm pretty sure, and I cannot remember off the top of my head right now. And I'm gonna have to look it up because I'm a little embarrassed.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I'm sorry to put you in that position because I don't know it either.
I should know.
I think that if you look at the program that Lehman runs in Providence, it's a very what's the word? Rigorous, a system that he runs where it requires a lot of his forwards to be physical and back check, and it's definitely a team first. They don't have like one star. It's like a
and he's not used to that
type of deal.
He's not used to that, right? Because if you think about Princeton, right?
Yeah, and then and so he went to Penticton and he lit it up. So that's definitely a good sign, and he could play physical. He's got decent size, but of course with him, really it's the speed that makes him stand out. So I misspoke though. It's not because of Moynihan. Moynihan was already wasn't there yet. It was last year. This year he was with Penticton. Flyers fans, listen, if Flyers fans are a little upset or about the pick or worried about it, that's fair. But again, you still can't write him off completely. You have to give him a chance to resume his college career. Maybe he'll make corrections. Maybe he'll reinvent himself. You never know. But based on what the Flyers have cooking at the NHL level, the forward prospects that are already established and ahead of him on the depth chart, whether they played in Lehigh Valley or were given a cup of coffee in the NHL, and then plus, you got to factor in whatever pick they grab this year. They always run the risk of long-term project. Unfortunately for a first-round pick, but that's where we're at right now with Jay O'Brien.
And I honestly, I think we all kind of expected that at the time. But the fact that his speed is his biggest thing, I think that's pretty important. And he has looked very good at the dev camps. But again, hasn't necessarily transgressed, and it's going to be Boston University. I was right when I said that. I just wasn't sure in my head. So he'll be at Boston. I think he might. Well, they're not playing yet, but I think he's already there. So he was playing in the BCHL before that, right? So now he's going back, and I still have hopes for O'Brien, but we'll see. And I think a lot of people, again, shoulda, woulda, couldas. I'm not a fan of them anyway. So let's move on here.
Yeah.
So next one, this is a guy who's coming to the Flyers now, signed a contract at ELC with us, Tanner Lozinski. He's been very good with the very good in NCAA hockey for the past 4 years, and the Flyers think that he has a chance to make the team out of camp. What do you think about Tanner Lozinski?
I mean, listen, he was a late round pick. I remember when he played in the USHL. I forgot where I had him ranked, but I think the Flyers actually took him lower than where I had him. But listen, when you go, there was one tournament where he really stood out to me. I don't know if you guys know this tournament, but it's fun. Too bad that they canceled it because of COVID. But it's called the JWCW or the JCWC, the Junior Club World Cup. They hold it in Russia every year. It's usually in August. It's sponsored and run by the MHL, the top Russian junior league. And they invite one main junior team from every country, whereas in North America, they pick one from Canada or one from the U.S. So they picked the Chicago Steel back in, I think, 2015. And Lozinski was part of that crew, and they won the thing, or they finished second. But, when you are a consistent point producer there, and then you go to Ohio State, and you're the main guy. You're a 4-year senior, not a big deal. But he's got good size. I mean, very smart. I definitely consider him more of a playmaker than a finisher, but he can finish. So it's not like he's unable to finish, especially near the net. When you watch Ohio State's power play, they had a couple of big names. What was the kid's name? Mason Jobst, whatever his name was from a couple of years ago. He was older. He was about 4 or 5 or maybe 3 or 4 years older than Lozinski, and it seemed like he was actually comfortable deferring to Lozinski to run the power play a few times. So I wouldn't call him a long-term project, but because he's been in the USHL for 3 full seasons, and now he was in college for 4 full seasons, his time in the AHL should be relatively short. What you'll see out of him in that first camp, specifically though, really when he gets to play that full first AHL season, don't expect him to have like your typical CHL kid that usually struggles. And I expect this kid to show up and right away be an impact player. Not a big scorer, but, he's going to be polished. And I would not be surprised. He's a very smart kid. He's an intelligent player. I would not be surprised if sooner by like mid-season, he's going to be a top 6 forward for the Phantoms.
Yeah, and I think that's how we see him as well. Probably starting off as top 6. And we have currently an opening in our bottom 6. So we're thinking maybe he has a chance over there. All right, so we'll see how that goes. So let's move on. We have a few left here, but Noah Cates would be the next. Noah Cates, another later draft, another American, another guy who's impressed, maybe another bottom 6 forward. What do you think about Noah Cates?
Well, listen, a Minnesota high school kid, I'm always big on those kids. Cates, the thing is, Minnesota Duluth is one of the premier programs in the country. And I think last year, though, they had some issues. I don't think they were as good. I'm confused with St. Cloud State. No, they were a good program last year, and Cates was one of the top scorers on the team. So you can't ask for anything more. He went to Stillwater High School, which is a big program, and they produce a lot of good NHL players in the past. So when I look at him, I think I don't think he's signed. He's going to stay in college. He's only a sophomore. I think he's a junior now. So with him, listen, it's exactly what you want out of your late round picks. You still got contractual comfort, I guess if you want to call it that, because he's only in his he's going to be in his 3rd year of college. So he's got 2 full years left in the NCAA. He's a late round pick, and oh, by the way, he's been one of the top players, underclassmen on a very solid program for each of the last 2 seasons. So definitely a playmaker. He could score, of course. He's got good hands, but passing vision, zone entries, those are the things I think of Noah Cates. When I think of Noah Cates, it's like controlling the puck, skating with speed through the neutral zone, and then creating lengthy possessions off of zone entries. And if you could do that in college against 24 and 25-year-old defensemen, he's got this good size, about 6'1", 6'2". So definitely a sleeper. I know that, the Flyers have had so many picks the last couple of years, and I've been in love with a lot of them. Some of them haven't really worked out that well, but Cates is a real sleeper. You got to keep an eye on him.
Yeah, we're definitely excited about him. And what do you have? 33 points in 34 games for Duluth last year.
Yeah.
That's very impressive for somebody his age. So he surprised us for sure. All right, we got a few more here. Let's go next to Bobby Brink.
Okay, yeah. I mean, Bobby Brink was basically a first-round pick that the Flyers got in the second round.
Yep.
And so, the fact that now Denver had a kid there, Matthias Emilio Pettersson, who was, one of the late-round pick from his draft year, but he was the big boy on that squad. But even the fact that they got what's his name, Brink, is that they were on the same line together. And so when you got your two best players in Emilio Pettersson and Bobby Brink, Pettersson being from the 2018 draft and Brink from the 19 draft, and Brink as a freshman is on your top line, and he's on your top power play unit. And I think he was on the World Junior team. Wasn't he on the World Junior team?
Yep.
Yeah, and so obviously disappointing tournament for the team. But listen, with Brink, I mean, he's dynamic. He's an outstanding puck magician. The concerns that we had with him, a little bit with the skating, not really speed, not really agility-wise, more like the straight line speed, pull away speed. But he more than makes up for it with the way that he controls the possession in the offensive zone. I mean, he's the guy that you want to have the puck in the offensive zone, whether it be along the wall, behind the net. He could play the point in the power play. He's always moving. His head's always up. You got to that seam, no matter how well that you could defend that seam, and no matter how active your sticks are, especially on the PK, Brink will find a way to open up that seam or pass through your legs or through your skates or whatever. Fantastic prospect. A lot of people had him as a first-round pick in 2019, and the fact the Flyers got him in the second round is outstanding. So if you're pretty much a point-of-game player as a freshman in a tough conference like the NCHC, it says a lot. So I don't see him as a 4-year player. I don't even see him as a 3-year player. I see Brink, you're concerned about his size. Well, it really didn't impact his play as a freshman in college. So if he could be 5'8" or 5'9" and $165 and not have his possession game impacted by the physicality of 22 and 23-year-old defensemen, then that means that his time in the AHL or his invite to the AHL is going to come rather quickly. So I love Brink. I think man, he's a fun play. He's a real fun playmaker, man. He's a fancy kid. He just pulls plays out of his you-know-what that makes the other team just the kind of jaws are dropped. He's definitely a tremendous talent.
Well, it's really interesting because that's the sense we got from him as well. Why do you think that he dropped? Do you think it was purely the skating? I saw his stride issue. It obviously is not an agility issue. It almost looks like a lazy kind of short stride that he needs to work on, maybe explosiveness, but that's fixable. So I'm trying to figure out why. Yeah. Why would he drop all the way to second?
Well, it could have been size. Like I said, the Blues won the Cup that year, and the Blues were heavy and mean. And, the Winnipeg Jets were successful, and they're heavy and mean. And the Boston Bruins are successful, and they're heavy and mean. So I think that, not saying that those three teams dictated the draft, but in a way, when some teams look at him, I had Mastro Simone ahead of Brink. Robert Mastro Simone, who was a Detroit draft pick, and he's actually playing for BU as well next season. And I had some USHL guys. What are you high? Why are you drafting? No, I'm not dissing Rob Mastro Simone. I'm like, dude, I saw the kid play like 8 times, and he was a freaking beast. And I love him. Like, you kind of fall in love with some of these kids. Whereas Brink, I saw this in spurts with Brink. You saw a little bit of overpassing and trying to be too fancy and 1-on-4s that I'm not a big fan of. Yep. Not that Brink can't slow things down and recalculate, especially high at the blue line and let things kind of unfold and wait for puck support to arrive. But there was a little bit of selfishness in his game. Not in like, oh, it's me, but there were just times where you just got to dump the puck in. Or you got to just eat it and get involved in a board battle. And you didn't really see a whole lot of that out of Brink. But no issues with him this year at Denver. I didn't watch like every game. Right. But the few times I watched them, listen, the kid, he's a puck wizard. It's the best way I could describe him. He's a puck wizard. The puck's on his stick, and he could do a million. He's like got Pat Kane type of puck control. It's that outstanding. So,
wow.
Yeah, he'll be in the AHL probably after. I think I don't know what his situation is. Maybe he wants a degree, maybe he doesn't. But my prediction is I think Brink is done after this season, and he'll go to the AHL unless he's being advised that, you need to bulk up a little bit more, maybe so after your junior year. But yeah, I mean, home run pick. You get him in the early second round. It's a home run pick.
That was the nice consolation for everybody when we passed up on Cole Caulfield. Everybody was like, all right, well, at least we got Brink. We feel better about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so we got 3 left here. Let's do Brzezinski first, Bryce Brzezinski. Then we'll do Fairby. We'll end with York since it started with Brian Leach, so I figured it'd be appropriate.
All right. Well, Bryce Brzezinski, I watched him a ton his draft year. He was the top center and the captain for Blaine, and Blaine had a super line. Blaine High School had a super line of Carson Rickles and Cole Hansen on the wings. They're both eligible first year for this draft, and Brzezinski in the middle. And I believe Brzezinski won Mr. Hockey. He was named the top player in the state, and he's a big, he's listed, I think it's 6'1", 200, so I could call him big, but he just dominated that prep, sir. He just dominated the high school level. He was just way too good. And so when you make this decision to stay home and go to Minnesota, the Gophers, it's a big deal. Tons of pressure, though, on these kids. And the one thing about Brzezinski that I like is that he's very good on faceoffs, and he's a playmaker. So I don't want to call him Kevin Hayes, because Kevin Hayes was definitely a higher rated prospect at his Boston College days, and maybe a little bit more versatile because he played center and wing. Mm-hmm. Whereas Brzezinski, though, is a big-bodied playmaker. He's the guy that could be a pass-first type. And so Minnesota, the Gophers, they just have not been a high-powered attack really in any of the last 4 or 5 years. Even when they had Casey Middlestat, who's, a potential top 5 pick in his draft year and destroyed the World Junior Championships in 2017 or 2018. I never got the sense that Minnesota Gophers prospects, forwards that is, become consistent producers until they're like juniors or seniors. It's almost maybe it's the 4-line deployment. Maybe it's the lack of real playmakers on the back end. So it's really a forward-centric attack. So just take his stats with a grain of salt. I think he didn't have stats that come off the charts, but he's going to be a 4-year guy. And by the time he's at the end, the Nashville Predators have had a couple of kids who are Gophers, and they drafted them, I believe, in 2015 or 16. Tommy Novak, Rem Pitlick might be the other one, where they were there for 4 years, and they marinated, and they were patient with them, and then they went to the AHL, and Milwaukee, Nashville's affiliate, was one of the best AHL teams in the league this year, and those two guys had a lot to do with it. So I'm a huge fan of AHL production over college or junior. The AHL is far more of a bigger indicator. And so with Brzezinski, we're going to have to wait on him. But still, the big body playmaker, all right, he's not the best skater in the world, but still he's a big body playmaker. Look at Kevin Hayes. He's not a great skater. John Tavares, not a great skater. And I'm not saying Brzezinski's going to be a 65 to 85 point NHL center, but they got him listed on as a winger. But to me, I saw him play center the whole season, so I think that's going to be his position once he makes it.
That's interesting. Yeah, he is listed as a winger. I will say this: he definitely stuck out during development camp. The times that I've seen him, and not just me, definitely in the local Flyers community. Everybody, he's stuck out to everybody. So it's interesting that a guy who's taken, another late round pick. It's something actually that our scouts have been very good at lately. I mean, we got Oscar Lindblom late. We got a lot of guys who have either NHL potential or been good players for us in those late picks. He seems like another one. So the fact that you're high on him, my expectation with a guy like that is bottom 6 forward in the NHL, or at least a high-end AHL guy, right? So that's cool. That's great. All right, so let's go to these are the 2 most fun ones. Let's start off with Joel Fairby, a guy who is not really a prospect anymore, but he's younger than some of the prospects we went through. And I personally love this kid, but I want to hear what you have to say about him first.
Well, I try not to toot my own horn because I made a ton of mistakes, but I ranked him ahead of Wahlstrom. I believe I was the only one that did out of almost 50 outlets, 60 outlets.
Yes.
And it was really based off of one tournament, and it was I want to say it was the November 5 Nations of that draft season. Mm-hmm. And I saw the kid, And I think Wahlstrom wore 18 and Fairby wore 28 or vice versa. And I saw some kid on a shift go absolutely bananas for 2.5 minutes. It was, I think, against the Czechs or Sweden. I forgot. But he went bananas. Like, he was doing everything. He was hitting. He was blocking shots. He was creating odd man rushes. He ran like a 1.5-minute cycle on his own. And then when he was dog-tired at the end of the shift, he looked at the bench but didn't go to the bench and decided to stay on the ice. And because he stayed on the ice, he created a scoring chance, and I think they scored. So I'm like, that was like the greatest shift I've ever seen in my life. So I wrote in my notes, I'm like, Wahlstrom, my goodness, all this stuff. And then I went back because I record the games. I went back and I watched it. I'm like, holy crap, that was Fairby. That was not Wahlstrom. So meanwhile, Wahlstrom is freaking scoring 45, 50 goals. I'm like, I'm like, you got to watch this Fairby kid. And what happened was when that top line, I know I'm kind of like talking old. This is like, you want to focus more on the present, but that was my rationale behind being high on him. And the fact that when Jack Hughes showed up late in that draft season, it became the Hughes-Wahlstrom show, and Fairby was kind of cast aside. It was not playing the role of the playmaker, which he was. Before Hughes, they had Jake Pavanka as the center, but Fairby as the left wing was the playmaker on that line, on that top-end TDP line. Jack Hughes comes along. We don't need Fairby to play make anymore. And so he was kind of cast aside. So outstanding development. He deserves everything he's gotten. He's a hard worker. He's a funny kid. He's got a great personality. I really am so happy for this kid. I really am, and not just because I had him ranked ahead of Wahlstrom, he's making me look good. Like I said, I love compete level. I love kids with skill and hands, but I love the kids that show up to the rink every day and they will give you full out effort. And listen, the Flyers are not rebuilding. The Flyers were a cup contender this year, and it became evident early in the season that this Flyers team was no joke, and that you're going to give this kid a top 9 role. He was only drafted 2 years ago, had that mind-blowing goal, right? Was in the AHL that he scored it. Yeah, he's no joke. I compared him to Claude Giroux. I don't know, man. I mean, Giroux's a borderline Hall of Famer with the numbers he's put up, but I mean, I would not be surprised if Joe Farabee's on. Listen, you got to bridge the gap. Giroux and Voracek are getting old. They're expensive, and one way to help bridge that gap is you learn from these guys, and then you pass the torch on to the guys like Fairby, Kneckney, and potentially Morgan Frost. But yeah, Fairby's great, man. You guys are lucky. You lucked out. I was hoping the Rangers were gonna, maybe trade up and get him, but it ended up working out in your favor. So unfortunately, I got to see this kid terrorize my team now for the next 10, 15 years.
Love that answer. But yeah, he was a guy I was actually worried he wouldn't be available. It was interesting. I was actually like teetering on a lot of other guys, and then Fairby. When I saw Two-Way Assassin, I brought this up to you. I saw you label him Two-Way Assassin, and then I started watching him, and I started focusing on something that you were talking about, actually, the fact that everybody was talking about Hughes and Wahlstrom. I was like, but I was watching and I was like, I don't get it. I was like, this guy is just as talented. I was like, what's the issue? And then I realized that program was insanely talented, and I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, in my mind, you can't go wrong by grabbing one of these guys. Essentially, you grab one of the guys from this program, you're probably getting what you want. Then I just started looking at his game overall, and outside of him just being slight of frame, I was like, I don't see any weaknesses. I was like, if we get this guy mid-first round pick, I was like, this seems like a guy who's a top-line left-wing player that I could count on to be a top-line player in the future. And so far, he's been very good in all aspects of the game. But physicality-wise, it forces him to make bad plays that he normally wouldn't make. And for example, we were talking about the playoffs. He would maybe dump the puck or maybe make a bad pass where he's trying to avoid kind of getting leveled. And it kind of ended with Fairby getting a concussion there at the end too. So it's like, we talk about all this skill and then we talk about the physicality. But I agree with you. I'm very high, very, very high on Fairby. Super excited about him. All right. So last one, and this is one guy. This is maybe our most controversial pick of late, and really only for the fact that we passed on Cole Caulfield to take him. But a guy from the U.S. development program, right? And in my opinion, I'm very excited about him, especially when I found out that outside of Jack Hughes, he was the youngest player on the team. And hearing that a defenseman is the #1 defenseman on that program, and he's younger than everybody, you never hear a defenseman's younger. You only ever hear that it takes him a little bit longer. So when I hear that, I get excited. What do you think about Cam York?
Well, Cam York had a very difficult position to be in because he was on the greatest junior program in hockey history. And I'm not lying when I say that. They had 8 first-round picks. 17 of the kids from that one program got drafted. It's unprecedented. So
amazing.
It's not like I'm being biased because I'm American. The greatest junior program in the history of hockey was the 2018-19 NTDP. Now, when you have that kind of a program, it was loaded with forwards. I mean, 70 goal-scoring forwards, Jack Hughes, Alex Turcotte, Trevor Zegras. Then you have guys like Matt Boldy. I mean, it was ridiculous how much talent that team had. And so for York, if you watch players like that, forwards like that, they love to be in control of the puck. And credit to that coaching staff because they found a way to get these kids, well, credit to the kids as well, but really to the coaching staff to get these forwards to play as unselfish as possible. So when you are an offensively gifted defenseman like Cam York, you could skate, you could hammer the puck, and you could dish it like better than anybody else. Like, you want to kind of, if you're drafting you too, you want to show your skills. And fortunately for him, it was Cam York's power play and everybody else was around it. And it worked out, even with a guy like Jack Hughes or Trevor Zegras. And these guys are just elite playmakers, like beyond elite,
right? Especially
at the junior level. It just worked out. And when you are a power play quarterback on that kind of a unit, I think you could probably quarterback any type of unit. Now, the thing that really stood out to me about York, though, like, listen, he deserved to be picked where he was picked. He was a top 20 pick. He went 14. You're talking about a defenseman that had almost 70 points for the NTDP. Adam Fox didn't even touch that. I think he broke the record. York did for most points. And that means more than Werenski, more than Hannafin, more than Adam Fox. I mean, the list goes on and on. Eric Johnson. So now points aren't everything. And he did play with a lot of quality players. Sure. But what happened? He ends up going to Michigan. Now, Michigan was not the Michigan that we're used to seeing, right? University of Michigan. They were terrible for like 3 or 4 years in a row, like beyond terrible. Like they were like rioting in freaking Ann Arbor. They couldn't believe how bad the team was. And they bring in this freshman class. They bring in York. They bring in Johnny Beecher, his teammate, who was a first-round pick of the Bruins.
Yep.
And they had a huge bounce back season, specifically in the defense and the goaltending. So, I mean, if you watched Michigan 2 seasons ago, man, they were so bad. And they were one of the worst defensive teams out of the top programs in the country. And then last season, they were one of the better teams on defense. So even though York didn't put up 70 points, he was still the top scoring defenseman on the team, was a top 4 guy, bounced around between the top pairing and the middle pairing, ran the top power play, and was, like I said, the top scoring defenseman. So there's one little aspect of his game that's very underrated. He plays a very clean physical game. He is not a pushover. He's got good size, decent size. I guess about 6 foot 180, but he's physical. There's actually a tweet or a GIF of him nailing Podkolzin, and Podkolzin obviously was a couple years ago, but still, if you could deliver big hit, if you deliver one big hit, and it's on a very public stage or a high-profile event, and that hit is delivered on Vasily Podkolzin, that you have that potential to do it again and again and again. So I would not label him as an offenseman. Obviously, he's got to work on, I guess, really using his speed, his back skating to kind of seal off those on-rushing guys and finishing off with authority. Because he tries to hit, it's just a matter of actually finishing the check and separating the guy from the puck. So that's going to come in with time. But listen, the Flyers should groom him as their future #1, as their future power play quarterback. He has that potential. Maybe another year in Michigan won't hurt. But he was not some type of like throw-in or support guy for the NTDP. He was a huge piece to that and deserved to go where he was drafted.
Yeah, and I get really excited. And we have Shane Gostisbehere is kind of a big story here in Philly. And how I see it is that York is that guy that allows us. I mean, we have other young players, but York really is that guy where you're like, even if Shane Gostisbehere was here and you want to get him back on the power play, if Cam York is in your lineup, he's going to take everybody else's time too. So it's like that's how I assumed. And what I've seen from him is just a very poised, polished, potential number one defenseman. I mean, that's what I've seen from him. Hopefully he can hit that, but I was hoping him and Provorov, we have obviously Travis Sanheim and Phil Myers, that the four of them could be kind of the cornerstone of our defense moving forward. So it's pretty exciting stuff. All right, we've done quite a bit here. You gave me lots of time today. We're actually way over. Super appreciate everything. Thank you so much for coming on, Steve. This was so much fun and great info on all this, a bunch of stuff that I've never even heard before. So can you let people know where to follow you one more time and, sign off?
Okay. All right. Yeah, you can reach me at thedraftanalyst.com. It's a free blog. There you'll find my 2020 draft headquarters. You go there, you'll find all types of fun stuff, mock drafts, rankings, prospect profiles. I got a YouTube channel called Prospect Film Room. It's got all types of footage from a lot of draft prospects, specifically the main ones, but I'm adding about 50 to 75 more before the draft takes place. So you'll be able to maybe catch some clips of some of the kids the Flyers end up drafting. And then I got my NHL Draft Report. It's $5. It's only 7 megabytes, 376 scanner reports, 31 team previews, a mock draft, a 2-round mock draft, and a preview for 2021 and the top 300 ranking for this draft in particular. So, draftanalyst.com and Twitter at the Draft Analyst. Too easy to find me.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much. And I'll have the link for that in the article and in the body of this video. So if you guys are looking for it, I'm gonna link to Steve's stuff here so you have a direct link to it. And definitely give him a shout out, give him a look, check out his report, and it's worth it. It's worth reading. And after a while, I've been following you for a little bit. A lot of your predictions were accurate, like the Wahlstrom thing. I was very excited about Fairby, so everybody should keep an eye out. It's good stuff here. And thank you again, Steve. Thanks again for coming on. Super excited for the draft. Steve will be doing an episode. He's been doing an episode on all of the NHL teams, a preview of their draft, what they potentially need. Check that out on Spotify as well. He has a Flyers one that's up and coming. I think you said next week, right, Steve, that it's going to come out? So next week he'll have an episode on the Flyers. Yep. So we'll share that out as well for people to check out. Love hearing different opinions. Steve, thank you again. Thank you, everybody, for listening to us. And remember to always stay gritty.